We've all seen at least one movie or read a book that was excessively creepy, but what if those stories came to life? That's what it must have felt like for the McDaniel children who encountered the Enfield monster. On a random night in 1973, two young siblings claimed to see a weird monstrous creature in their yard trying to get into their house. Their father, Henry McDaniel, disregarded their claims, but was forced to believe soon after when he heard strange scratching sounds. Henry sought out the source of the sound, only to find a creature that looked exactly like his kids described. He shot at the creature 4 times and was certain at least one of the bullets hit the beast. This caused it to let out a hiss sound, which Henry described to be similar to a wildcat scream, and scurry toward a railway embankment, covering about 80 feet with just 3 jumps. According to him, the creature had 3 legs on it, a short body, 2 little short arms, and 2 pink eyes big as flashlights. The police were alerted and reportedly found scratches on the door screen and footprints in the dirt near the family's house. The prints were said to be dog-like, with 6 toe pads, but the cops refused to believe McDaniel's story. The story made the local news at the time, but many believed it was all a lie. McDaniel would eventually report 2 more sightings of the beast, but unfortunately, even the cops stopped believing him and threatened him with jail time. McDaniel even took the matter to court and made a case regarding seeing a beast, but the judge didn't buy it either, so the monster was never found, but many other citizens of the small town of Enfield claimed to see similar creatures. In fact, at least 5 men were arrested in the months after the McDaniel incident, all for firing shots in the direction of an unseen creature. To this day, the creature was never found, but many citizens of the small town still fear its existence. Despite how creepy that story is, the McDaniel family couldn't have been more scared than the McDaniel family from Houston when they had an experience with a haunted doll. When the McDaniel family received a Disney's Frozen Elsa doll for Christmas in 2013, they made the rational assumption it was just a random doll. Like you'd expect from a Disney-themed doll, it recited phrases from the movie Frozen and also sang a brief rendition of Let It Go. For the first 2 years after the family got the doll, they didn't notice any signs of anything out of the ordinary until 2015, when the mother, Emily, began noticing that this doll was now making those sounds not just in English, but also in Spanish. This happened without any upgrade being made or buttons being pressed to change the doll's setting, but the family overlooked it. Next, they noticed it began randomly making these singing and speaking sounds even when it was switched off. Eventually, they grew frustrated and threw out the doll. This was after owning it for 6 years and never having to change its batteries. All that sounds creepy as is, but there's more. A few weeks after throwing out the doll, the family returned home one day only to find it sitting on a bench in their living room. The doll had been thrown into the garbage bin weeks earlier. It must have been deep down in the trash, so it's hard to imagine one of the kids went through the trash just for fun. Upon her unprecedented return, Elsa only sang in Spanish when pressed. So what did the Madonias do? They double-bagged the bizarre doll and buried it at the bottom of the garbage bin, which was taken out soon after. But when the family went on a short trip, they returned to meet Elsa back again, this time waiting patiently in their backyard. Finally, to get rid of her altogether, they mailed the doll to a family friend in Minnesota, who has now taped the haunted doll to the front bumper of his truck. Has Elsa the doll been able to move there? Probably not, but the Madonia family will probably not be keen on getting a new doll anytime soon. Next, we have the terrifying story of Jen from Ohio and her grandmother's cabin. For the sake of this narration, we'll be referring to our main character as Jin, dad and brother Jin. When Jin was a kid, his grandmother died, leaving his dad as the owner of a log cabin in the woods somewhere in Indiana. So Jin, his dad, and his brother would visit the cabin to spend a few days. But the very first night they moved in marked the beginning of a series of creepy events that stuck with Jin all his life. On that first night, the brothers witnessed the inexplicable presence of a fourth party who somehow eluded their dad's sight. Early that evening, Dad went into the barn to pick something. The brothers spotted the silhouette of a man wearing a cowboy hat coming toward the main house. They assumed it was their father, only for him to come out on the opposite side of the barn once the silhouette had disappeared. For years, during the nights spent at the cabin, the brothers heard footsteps pacing the porch or footsteps in the house. They also witnessed doors opening and slamming hard without anyone being there. On one occasion, Jin saw his dad's 200-pound punching bag pull itself back about 5 feet and slam into him, knocking him out of his chair. Another time, the brothers saw shadows of the same cowboy man and heard him giggling with an unseen woman and calling out their names. Despite all these, their dad never witnessed any of these events and refused to address his son's paranoia, so maybe they were actually bluffing and nothing creepy was happening. Well, wrong, because according to Jin, when they owned dogs a few years later, both dogs would frequently bark at the same punching bag like they could see an intruder. And for even more confirmation, 3 of Dad's girlfriends at different times all refused to stay at the cabin. This was because they all had similar experiences of unseen intruders walking around the house calling their names. One of the ladies even claimed the shadow once pinned her to her bed and tried to cover her mouth with cold hands. Sure, these events could be considered speculative or exclusive events of paranoia, but think about it. 5 people and 2 dogs all having similar experiences with a hat-wearing shadow man. Yeah, there definitely was something haunting the cabin. Moving on, here's a real-life story that's not for the faint of heart. The death of Elisa Lamb. Elisa Lamb was a young lady who seemingly disappeared after January 31st, 2013. Her last known whereabouts was in the lobby of the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Based on CCTV footage retrieved by the police, Elisa was last seen in the elevator at the hotel. In the footage, she appears to be talking to invisible people and was seen peering around the corner of the door and crouching in the corner. It's hard to explain what's going on in the video, but either Lamb was disturbed mentally or was reacting to assailants outside the view of the camera. Either way, after that day, her parents, who she had been on calls with every day, stopped hearing from her, and her consistent uploads of her her trip on her blog ended abruptly. While investigations went on, guests at the Cecil Hotel began making complaints regarding the hotel's water supply. The water briefly turned black anytime the tap was put on. The tap water had a strange taste, and so on. The hotel disregarded these complaints for weeks, until February 19th, when a hotel employee climbed to the roof to investigate the hotel's water storage tanks. What the employee discovered was much more horrendous than anyone could imagine. Elisa's decomposing naked body was found in the tank, her personal items were found nearby, and the police could only label her death as accidental after autopsy. But the weird circumstances surrounding this accidental death is what qualifies this story on this list. For one, the hotel roof had restricted access and was secured with an alarm, a lock, and a metal latch. The alarm never went off, the lock wasn't broken, and yet Elisa's body was in the tank. And secondly, there had been a series of crazy events involving this hotel over the years. 5 decades before Elisa's death, a woman jumped to her death from the hotel's window, killing herself and a pedestrian she landed on. Almost 2 decades later, a serial killer known as the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, lived at the hotel for many months. In 1991, international serial killer Jack Unterweger also lived at the hotel and murdered 3 prostitutes during the time he was there. Was Elisa's death related to one of these grim events, or was it all really accidental? Guess we'll never know, but you'll probably be more careful about drinking hotel tap water now. For the 5th real-life horror story on our list, let's check out the tale of Florida devil worshipping. Is it moral to worship an entity that represents evil? Does the devil even exist? Those are questions to be answered in a different video or in your theology class. However, when a 35-year-old schoolteacher in St. Petersburg, Florida began acting strange in June 2012, it was clear it had to do with her newly found interest in demonic rituals. Her friends and colleagues first noticed this, but before any of them saw anything concerning enough to seek help, the police got involved. Only then was it revealed that Danielle Harkins had been abusing 7 of her former students. She started off by threatening the kids and telling them they needed to be exorcised of their demons. To achieve this, she had them gather before dusk on a Saturday around a small fire. There, she demanded they cut their skin to let the evil spirits out and burn their wounds to keep the spirits away. Crazy as it sounds, Harkins actually took a step toward this, dousing a teenage boy's hand in perfume and setting it on fire, causing the boy to suffer second-degree burns. Next, she cut another teenager's neck with a broken bottle and used a heated key to cauterize the wound. As is common for victims of abuse, the students never woke up until their parents began noticing these severe injuries on their bodies. It was only then that the police were brought in, and guess what? Harkins showed no remorse for her actions and held on to her bizarre religious beliefs. The only saving grace in this crazy story is that she found out early enough before something more drastic happened. Unfortunately for the teenagers involved in the 2014 Utah murder-suicide, they weren't as lucky. The date was September 2014. The location, a small town in Utah. A boy in his teens returned home one day to find his parents and 3 siblings dead. On the scene, a notebook was found with a weird to-do list scribbled on the pages, and from those writings, it appeared as though the parents planned to travel for a vacation. Based on the police investigation, the scene appeared to be a murder-suicide, even though they had no way of grasping who committed the murders. There was no explanation, no suicide note, and no evidence linking any of the 5 deceased people to being the culprit, until over a year later when the police released a statement that revealed some chilling facts. Based on reports from family members of the deceased, the parents had an inexplicable obsession and paranoia of a pending apocalypse. They reportedly worried about the evil in the world and were seeking some sort of escape. Historically, when people have similar fears, it's common that they offer an off-grid lifestyle, but this couple channeled their fears towards getting in contact with one of the state's most infamous convicted killers, Dan Lafferty. Lafferty was in jail for the gruesome murder of his sister-in-law and her 1-year-old daughter in 1984, and claimed he acted on a revelation from God. So the Strack couple began by writing to him in prison and eventually became friends with him, even visiting him frequently. That's as far as the evidence goes, but it's probably enough explanation for nearly the entire family being found dead. Approaching the end of our video, let's briefly check the story told by an anonymous lady about an Austin serial killer. One weekend, a lady and her 2 friends were leaving a club in downtown Austin, their car that had been parked about 6 blocks away. The ladies had been out drinking till 3 a.m. and were headed to meet their boyfriends at a cafe not far away. As the ladies made the short trek to the parked car, they were approached by 2 men. What started off as the men hitting on the ladies soon became a harassment case, as one of the men began touching the ladies inappropriately. He also began hurling abusive words at the ladies and threatened to attack them physically. His erratic behavior prompted the other guy to caution him by saying, "Roger, let's go. Leave him alone, Roger." Before things could get out of hand, the ladies spotted a police officer not too far away and headed in that direction. They got to the officer and began reporting the incident that had just taken place, but upon looking back, the 2 men had vanished into thin air. The ladies eventually continued their night and put the whole untasteful incident behind them. But here's the creepy punchline. A few days later, the lady who shared this story was watching the local news when she saw an update. It announced that the police had arrested a man for murdering at least 2 women in the area, one of which was his live-in girlfriend. The report stated that the man was a serial killer, and the police were unsure of exactly how many victims he had. Want to take a guess on who this man was? Yep, it was Roger, the same guy who had harassed her and her friend a few nights before. They were lucky that the cop was there before something worse happened. For the last story on our list, here's a really old one about Isai the cannibal. In 1974, a 24-year-old Waco University student, Isai Sagawa, was arrested by the police for something really crazy. He had broken into a woman's house in Tokyo and attempted to cut off a piece of flesh while she was asleep, supposedly to eat it. After his arrest, for some bizarre reason, visa, cops charged him with attempted rape instead, and his influential father was able to settle the case out of court. Fast forward to 1981, and Isai was in the news, this time for shooting and eating the flesh of his college colleague in France. He went as far as documenting the entire experience and was only captured by the police while he was attempting to dump the rest of the victim's body in a lake. Rather than imprisonment, Isai was deported back to Japan, where he was committed to a mental institution. Yet again, this wasn't the last was heard of him. Due to his father's influence, he was discharged from the facility very prematurely. The documents regarding his arrest in France somehow disappeared, and Isai was allowed to go free. In the months after his release, he began writing creepy books in which he spoke about cannibalism. He even went as far as fantasizing about eating the flesh of a Japanese actress in one of his books. In his words, human flesh was tasty, but that was not really true. I'd much rather eat Matsuzaka, Kobe beef, but because I desired to consume human flesh for so long, I'd managed to convince myself that it is. If you've ever doubted the existence of cannibals, this should make you reconsider.